This week, 115th installment of the CSIS Capital Cable, 60th anniversary of the normalization of relations between Korea and Japan. With us, Johnstone, Tatsumi, Cha, all to unpack it and analyze it, dissect it, all that and more coming up next on the Capital Cable. All right. Good morning to those of you in DC. Good evening to those of you in Korea or Japan, as the case may be. Good day to those of you around the world. Welcome to the 115th installment of the CSIS Capital Cable. I'm Mark Lippert, your host and moderator. This week on the Capital Cable, coming to you from a kludged together yet superstar packed lineup here. Victor, myself, we're all over the place, but of course we've got Johnstone and Tatsumi in DC, so we are all over. But nonetheless, it is still I would say, the A team coming at you to unpack the 60th anniversary of the normalization of bilateral relations between the Republic of Korea and Japan, a deadly serious, critically important topic. And of course, what flows from that is the trilateral relationship with Washington in the mix as well. Then, as I previewed, with us, three outstanding experts. Let me just unpack them one by one, introduce them formally to the show. You know them well. They've been on the show before, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on their bios. But of course, we've got Yuki Tatsumi, who is a senior associate, rather, of the East Asia program at the Henry L. Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. Long list of accolades and accomplishments, too great to detail here. But I will say welcome to the show, Yuki.
Thanks.
All right, welcome back. And of course, next up, Chris Johnstone, partner the Asia Group. He's also adjunct at CSIS, where he ran the Japan program for a little while until he graduated to the Asia Group. I'm kidding, of course. It's like getting your dissertation. You like Cha wore him down at the oral examination, and so anyway, him and Hamry. But and of course, a long tenured. An outstanding stellar career in government service that includes the NSC, Pentagon, intelligence community as well. Chris, welcome back to the show.
Great to be here, Mark and Yuki, and glad to be with friends again. Thanks.
All right, outstanding. And of course, last but not least, Victor Cha, who, as I mentioned in the opening, we're kludged together a bit, but Victor, I'm not even sure where he is. Last episode he came to us from Spain, and this week I think we're having issues with his camera. We've got him on audio, and of course everybody knows Victor. He is the president of the geopolitics program at CSIS, vice dean emeritus at Georgetown, and of course a named professor there as well, and Bush NSC Defense Policy Board under Biden. Victor, welcome back to the show. And we do not have audio. So again, kludged together, we're getting it. Apollo 13 mission control is going to get him back up online. All right, let me go back up. Deadly serious topic here. And it's, we really wanted to have this on Monday because CSIS is having a big event this week in Washington on Wednesday to discuss this topic because it comes at this really important time in terms of the 60th anniversary, but also in the midst of some very complicated politics that put us at an important inflection point in both the bilateral relationship between Seoul and Tokyo and also the trilateral relationship involving Washington. So let's start with Yuki. Yuki, we're going to start with on the Japan side first. And the Japanese have been very interested in watching the Korean elections, right, which just produced the result of a new president, President Lee Jae-myung, of course. Walk us through that basket of issues. Where are the Japanese on the relationship with Seoul? What are they looking at? And then we'll obviously get into the trilateral piece as well. But Yuki, welcome back to the show, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, and good morning, and thanks for having me back on your show. So Japanese side, obviously, as you mentioned, have been very interested in how this Korean president election turned out to be. Mainly because in the past, Japan-Korea relations have really greatly fluctuated depending on who the president was at the top. And in by and large, I think incoming president Lee has been regarded as more cut out in the same cloth as the former President Moon Jae-in, who really wasn't helpful in stabilizing the relationship between Tokyo and Seoul, and also U.S.-Japan-Korea trilateral writ large. So they were very encouraged by the host of policy decisions made by the previous Yoon administration, which some of them are very courageous. And they were, in a sense, they were anticipating the victory of incoming President Lee. And so far has been somewhat relieved that he has kind of toned down his previous rhetoric regarding the Korea-Japan relations, and he seemed to be shifting more focused on respecting the existing dynamics in the U.S.-Japan ROK triad. But I think still in minds of many policymakers in Tokyo, the jury is very much out in terms of how this is all going to shake out. It is definitely a good sign that Prime Minister Ishiba had already spoken with the President Lee over the phone, and they agreed on the importance of the bilateral relations and then also triad. But I'll stop here for now.
No, outstanding. So let me hit you with a couple of follow-ups here. First, obviously, this is a sensitive, complicated, historic relationship a relationship rather charged with historical issues dealing with ostensibly or principally the Japanese colonial period in Korea, which is, just for people who don't follow this closely, that is at the heart of it. I oversimplified it greatly, but just to put that out there, let me ask you that, but fast forward to the future, present and future, why are the Japanese so interested in this relationship with the Koreans at this point in time? What are their strategic interests, and why are they concerned with a possible deterioration of relations that I think reached new heights under the previous conservative government in the Republic of Korea?
Yeah, of course. So obviously, like you mentioned, their bilateral relationship have been very much charged with the burden from the history of the colonial period that Korea was under the Japan's colonization and colonial rule. But that said, fast forward in the past to present, how the new or any given Korean government's posture toward not just North Korea, but toward U.S. and China will matter to Japan's geostrategic interests greatly. So it is noted in Japan that President Lee actually, set out with a more, I wouldn't say conciliatory, but more moderate tone vis-a-vis North Korea in terms of his government's anticipated posture. But then they were very much, and then also I think they will keep a close an eye on what he says about Korea's relations with China, because that has been very much of a concern for Japan, given the current tension in the East Asia, Indo-Pacific writ large, and the Chinese growing assertiveness in this region. And not to mention North Korea and China's deepening relationship with Russia of late, and how that could impact Japan's other side of the strategic interest up in northern half of their archipelago.
All right, outstanding. Last question for you, then I'm going to come to Chris. So talk to us about what the Tokyo's next moves are to try to strengthen bilateral ties with the Republic of Korea, bring the U.S. into a I guess I'd say a fulsome and effective way that really under the Trump administration in the 16-17 period, I think was, I think something that I think they will admit that they were late out of the blocks in getting to. And I think they, of course, corrected here, at least rhetorically and with some early moves, jury's still out. And then C, what are they thinking in terms of how all this fits together in terms of their strategic interests that you just outlined? Yuki, over to you.
Yeah, I think Oddly enough, now is a perfect coincidentally, all three leaders of the country, right? US, Japan, Korea, are all kind of convening in a Kananaskis for G7, with Korea being an observer there. And then I think three sets of bilateral relations, bilateral summit are anticipated to take place while all three leaders are there. So I think we may have some idea in terms of after this G7 events, that how, depending on how Prime Minister Ishiba's conversation with President Lee goes versus Ishiba, Trump, President Lee, and Trump, to see how the trilateral dynamics might shake out at that point. That being said, I think Japan is very much interested in maintaining the current trajectory on the Korea-Japan relationship as much as possible, because that really leads to better coordination between U.S., Japan, Korea, Trilateral, which will go a long way for stabilizing Japan's kind of strategic environment that surrounds Japan in the short to medium term.
All right, outstanding. Chris, over to you. Let's bring you into this conversation here. Let me set you up a little bit on Japanese domestic politics here, right? I think people have focused, understandably so, on the Korean election because of, I mean, frankly, all the fireworks around it, right? It's a snap election, it's rare, the impeachment, all of that. But it's not an uncomplicated situation in Japan at the moment, right? Can you walk us through that and talk a little about the complexities? I'm going to try to get Victor in to bring the Korean side. If not, I'm going to follow up with you on the Korean side as well. Chris, the floor is yours.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Mark. And as always, I agree with almost everything that Yuki had to say on this. Yeah, look, I think as Yuki pointed out, we've really benefited from a real heyday in Japan-South Korea relations over the last couple of years. But I think it's important to emphasize that it took a while for then Prime Minister Kishida to embrace the opportunity, right? Yoon signaled early on that he wanted to achieve a resolution of the coerced labor issue. Spoke publicly often about the importance of the relationship with Japan. But in the early days of this, right, Tokyo was pretty cautious in responding. And why was that? It's because the politics of relations with South Korea are complicated, and they're particularly complicated inside the Liberal Democratic Party. I often say that Prime Minister Abe was probably the seminal leader in Japan over the last several decades, but he had blind spots. And the two blind spots that I point to are the relationship with Russia and the relationship with South Korea. And so part of the reason Kishida was slow to embrace the opportunity with Yoon was that he was managing the politics of his own party and the deep skepticism on the right in the LDP about the prospects for a closer Japan-South Korea relationship. Now, what's happened since is that part of the LDP was pretty well eviscerated by a series of scandals and then the election last October. But it's still complicated, And we are headed into a political season in Japan. Tokyo elections coming up later this month, which are big local elections in Japan, and then an upper house election in July, which will, I think, in a lot of ways determine Ishiba's fate. His approval ratings are quite low at this point. I wholeheartedly agree with Yuki that the early steps that Ishiba has taken are positive. The phone call was good. The likelihood of a bilateral meeting this week is good. One of Ishiba's national security advisors, Aki Nagashima, was in Seoul over the weekend for talks with the ROC national security advisor. So the early signs here are good, but there's a lot of, just as Yuki said, caution and uncertainty about what a Lee presidency will mean for the relationship of Japan with Japan, and that's very much in the backdrop here.
All right, outstanding, Chris. Let me take a slight detour, at least maybe take a step back. The caution to embrace the South Korea relationship, right, that you talked about, rightly so. What's interesting here, though, is, as you and I have discussed before, the structural drivers are pointed generally in the right direction, right? We've had now, you can argue, over a decade plus, dating back to Lee Jae-myung's failed, but I think courageous attempt to effectuate a Jisomia that was then built on by Park Geun-hye. Moon Jae-in at the end of his term, said some positive things about the relationship that I think that set the stage. And then you've got, Yoon Suk-yeol and Lee Jae-myung. Interesting kind of continuity. Number one, politically, right? It's not been a hockey stick growth, right? But it's been up and down. But generally, trajectory has been positive, right? And that is for a couple of reasons, right? That we've talked about. Changing attitudes among young generation, the geopolitical environment, right? The role of the United States. Chris, can you walk us through some of those structural issues that you are looking out for? And the reason I bring them up is because we're in a time of foreign policy uncertainty where fundamental structural issues are being questioned. But so can you talk about some of those things that may have undergirded the positive direction and what you're looking for with those going forward as well?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. And I think one of the critical points to make here is that, yes, the United States played an important role in helping to build the momentum in the trilateral relationship under President Biden, and in some form that's likely to continue. But it's really important to emphasize that the improvement in Japan-ROC relations had a logic and a momentum all of its own. A year ago, almost exactly a year ago, Victor and I wrote a short piece on the CSIS platform after the Shangri-La dialogue last year that made the case that the strategic foundation for bilateral ties between Japan and South Korea has never been broader or deeper. That was, you'll recall, at the Shangri-La dialogue last year, Japan and South Korea formally resolved and normalized the defense relationship and put behind them an incident that involved an encounter at air and at sea between Japanese and ROC military forces. And the joint statement that those two defense ministers released a year ago was a really remarkable document that talked about Japan-South Korea security cooperation as being fundamental to a free and open Indo-Pacific. Really a dramatic, in my view, and this is what we wrote in the piece, a dramatic statement. And I think it was driven by a number of things, right? Driven by a sense that of growing apprehensiveness about the role of China, a sense that North Korea and its rapprochement with Russia posed new and unique security challenges to the two for the two countries. A sense that Japan and the ROC had common interests in the region, whether it's related to trade or economic development or cyber cooperation, all sorts of things. So the strategic logic for the two of them to get together has been strong and getting stronger for some time. And I would argue, actually, that you can make the case that even with the political dynamics in both countries that we've been talking about, that the strategic logic is even stronger now, given some of the uncertainty about the Trump administration and the strength of American commitment in the region. So there are structural factors here that are important. And Mark, maybe we can come back on the public opinion piece, because I think this is important also in both countries. I think there's
I was gonna follow up with you on this. Why don't you come in on that one right now? Because I think that's, look, we're all a bunch of IR theorists or practitioners, and we love to talk about great state powers and all that. But these are two great, vibrant democracies. So public opinion really matters, and that's an important piece. So Chris, over to you on that one.
Yeah, so there's been, I think, really notable shifts in public opinion in both countries. There's a regular poll that the Japan's Cabinet Office performs that looks at public views of Japan's international relationships. And in the most recent one, at the end of last year, 56% of the public expressed friendly or somewhat friendly feelings toward the Republic of Korea. That's a significant increase. But most importantly, 72% of those under 30 expressed positive views about South Korea. So this sense of, I think, generational change on the Japanese side is very much there. Similarly, in a recent Asan Institute survey, lower. I think South Korean views of Japan are more complex for all the historical reasons we've talked about. But approaching 50%, so higher than in recent history, among the highest in the history of the survey. And at the same time, in both countries, really significant worsening of public opinion toward China. So there is this, I think, just as you said, Mark, this sense that the public views of each other have improved as well. And so I think what this underscores for me is political leadership matters in both countries, right? Right? In other words, both Yoon and Kishida and now Ishiba championed this relationship, and it clearly had a positive effect on public opinion. So the choices that leaders make about how to approach this relationship will also have an impact on public opinion and can be either self-reinforcing or could be harmful depending on the choices that they make.
All right, outstanding. And I'm going to add, in addition to the leaders, which I wholeheartedly agree with, having been through this for over a decade myself personally, I also think that social media and the interconnected nature of kind of the netizens across, you know, Korea to Japan, you know, people, Gen Z millennials are much more likely to be talking to people in Japan than they are, you know, talking to North Koreans, right, for example, or, you know, and I think that plays a role with Gen Z, and the information sources, right, are different, right, and the contact and interactions. So I think there's a grassroots component to this. It's very interesting as well. Pet theory, don't have data. That's what former ambassadors do, pet theories. Anyway, all right. Yuki, you want to come in on this? Wait, let me just ask, do we have Victor yet? Is Victor there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, Victor. All right. Come on in, please.
Yeah.
Can you, before I go to Yuki, can you, well, this is the part of the show where I ask you a question, you ignore it, you answer your own question. So we might as well just go to form here on this. But your theory of the case on this set of issues here. Victor, the floor is yours, and welcome in.
Thanks. Sorry, ironically, I'm in Silicon Valley and I have a bad Wi-Fi connection. But I think what both Yuki and Chris have said make a great deal of sense. I think from the Korean side,
not me, not my interventions, though, Victor. Not my intervention. I'm joking.
Yes, your interventions as well. But I think there are high expectations that the leaders will meet in Canada during the G7 summit. But like Chris did, let me take it back to some of the domestic politics of this. On the Korean side, we saw President Lee.
Oh no. And
I think we lost him. Right at the goods part. All right, so I'll pick this up. We'll try to get Victor back. I think what Victor's point is largely going to be is during the political campaign, President Lee's rhetoric was pretty interesting towards Japan. It was, I think, arguably softer than previous progressive governments had been, number one. Number two, I think he generally avoided using the issue to, stoke or to sort of, to try to gain votes. Rather, people would say tacked more to the center, right? Throughout, there was the phrase in Korea, right clicking, right? And we can talk about the motivations for that. Some of it's, I think, for the youth voters, right? Some of it is to try to get the independent voters in the middle, right? Some of it is because he knew he had the party so well unified on the left. It was an unbelievable show of unity from the DP that he could afford to make some moves towards the center, and it paid off for him, right? I mean, he did get 50+1 in a very, very divided Korea, and so I think that's Victor's larger point, right? And now it does set up. I'll just make a comment here. They're still within the DP elites, not unlike the LDP, right? You do have, I think, some conflicting views about how to approach Japan, right? I think there are people with long-held views, that the Japanese haven't done enough. And then there are others who are, I would argue, in the more, I guess you could argue, pragmatic camp, right? And I think that's where we are. I personally am encouraged with the appointment of Lee Sung-lak as the National Security Advisor. Everybody knows him. He's a long-standing, I would call him a pragmatist who gets along with, I think, people across the aisle, both in Seoul, in Tokyo, in Washington, just a well-respected individual, and is also, I think, has the chops, right, as a member of parliament, or member of the National Assembly rather, from the Democratic Party, right? And they put, I think we sung like #2 on the party list when he ran. I mean, that's the show of respect for him, right? There's a proportional system in Korea. So anyway, so early days, I'll be very interested, but I would argue early signs are positive, not to overstate it, but positive, right? All right, so Yuki, let me come to you as soon as, and Victor, if you're on, just come back in when you get up. Just jump on in. Yuki, your comments on.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
there you go.
Come on in. Gotcha.
Oh, so so I don't know what's going on. I mean, all I would add to that is that there was a moment in the during the campaign, and I think it was right.
Uh-oh. I think we might have lost him again.
I think we lost him again.
Yep.
A moment right in the campaign, and then drops out. It's like the perfect timing. Anyway, all right. Yuki, floor is yours.
Yep. Yeah. So, Mark, I think you kind of put the point that I think Chris and I will probably generally agree with on the Japanese side as well. So, in the way that President Lee basically having the unified party behind him gives him a little bit of a political maneuver room to go to, move to the center. Prime Minister Ishiba, at this point, politically speaking, don't have that luxury. His party is more or less fractured. There's a lot of criticism inside the party against his specific policies, his general approach. So that makes it harder for him to take, let's say, if President Lee takes another courageous steps, kind of extending an olive branch, can Prime Minister Ishiba reciprocate? When having this 2 upcoming election, and the backlash within the party is mostly coming from more of a conservative camp who felt like, who's basically watches every move like a hawk to, make sure that he doesn't compromise too much. So that could come into play. But I think for now, conservative side within the LDP really doesn't have a great thing going either, because they also did lose a unifier in the name of when the former Prime Minister Abe unfortunately was assassinated. So there was really no unifying force that put their voice together either within the party. So that could work for Ishiba to have a more room in terms of his diplomatic maneuvering, or not, because there could be a whole host of kind of a, one shot off kind of a, critical voice all over the place in the media, where if someone like Prime Minister Abe was still alive, he was actually the believer of the trilateral relationship. So he would have been able to almost place like a gag order against those voices in the interest of promoting stable Korea, Japan, and trilateral relationship. So I think that could really cut both ways, but I don't know how you see this, Chris.
Yeah, I think I agree, Yuki. I mean, Mark, I was going to sort of put a question back to you and Victor related to Korean politics and the nature of Lee's emerging government, such as we understand it today. When I talk to Japanese friends, and I'm struck by the caution I hear and the pretty deep-seated worry about what a progressive government is going to mean for Japan. And when I talk to them, and I note that, Lee was pretty moderate on Japan in the campaign, rhetoric was all positive. What's the issue? They make the case that that early on it was the same with Moon, and it wasn't the leader himself; it was the party behind him that ultimately compelled the Korean leader Moon Jae-in first, and they anticipate same with Lee, that ultimately pushed the government to take a sharper line on Japan. How do you guys think about that? Is that a legitimate concern, or is it sort of overblown that history will repeat itself?
Well, I'll take a stab, and then Victor come in. Victor, if you're there, Okay, I will do my best here to channel Victor. My answer to that is I think that I think this two things. One, the role of advisors is key. Well, first of all, the role of the president himself. Moon Jae-in's reputation, and I have a lot of respect for President Moon. He's a consensus builder, right? And so he will listen to a wide range of voices, and he will generally try to forge consensus, right? And I think that made him more apt to follow the party versus stake out his own course of leadership, right? It's a leadership style, right? And I think that was his style, number one. I think Lee Jae-myung is a bit different than that, right? He is much more of a lead and follow type model of Korean president. So I think that's point one. The second point I would say is that's why I referenced the advisors, right? The appointment of advisors is critical, right, on this, right? And I think Lee Sung-lak, and I would also say the trade minister, also Han Koo-yo, who's been on this show as well. Both have been on the show. I think are early signs. I don't want to overinterpret them, of a certain direction, right? That's the second point, right? And I think the third point is, which I will try to segue us into, is the role of the United States, right? I think my biggest counter to the Japanese would be the last time this happened, and it goes back to a philosophical role that I have towards the United States, which isn't to define the contours of the relationship. We can't do that. Only the Koreans and Japan know the contours of that relationship. It's like trying to dictate a market, number one. Number two, the Koreans and Japanese won't let us force them together on sensitive political, historical issues like this. There are limits of our power. But I think what we can do is, when windows are open, we can encourage and accelerate change. And when things are more difficult or uncertain, we can prevent backsliding. And I think in 16 and 17, they're probably, arguably, Chris, you were in that administration, probably could have done a bit more to prevent some backsliding, right? I think early signs from Trump 2.0 are that they have learned that lesson and they are being more aggressive on this point. And I think that's my rejoinder to the Japanese on that. Again, I tend to be foolishly optimistic on this, but the optimism generally stems from the structural issues that we've talked about earlier, right? There will be ups and downs, so there will be steps back, but I do think the structural issues tend to point us towards a direction of progress, right? And let me stop there. That was my best job channeling Victor. So there we go. Well, let me then bring us to the U.S. role, right? I think that this is an appropriate point. Let me, Chris, come to you, and then Yuki. U.S. role, Chris, you were a long-serving civil servant across a number of administrations. You were there, both Obama, where this really got heated up, right? You were there Trump, you were there Biden. So talk to us about the U.S. posture, and talk to us about 2 points. One, we've got bilateral issues, Tokyo and Washington, Seoul and Washington, largely on the economics, but not exclusively limited to that. And then two, how does this play into the trilateral? And Yuki, I'm going to come to you with the exact same questions. So you get a little extra time.
Yeah, great questions, Mark. Yeah, look, I as I think back on Obama and Trump 1, Obama did his part to encourage a deeper trilateral relationship. He hosted a Pak and Abe for a trilateral meeting in Washington, for example. So, leaning forward, but just as you said, there was a big step back on this agenda in the first Trump administration.
Right.
And I remember feeling a great sense
remember, too, under Obama, Comfort Woman Agreement and Jasomia.
And Jasomia,
right?
That's right.
Pieces,
that's
signed. Anyway.
Right.
And the Trump guys did protect Jasomia. Really, that was the red line. So sorry, I'm previewing it, but that's when they really got involved, in my view.
Yeah,
I
agree with that. There was just less, I think, sort of systematic focus on building the trilateral relationship. And I remember Secretary Mattis at the time really pulled back from a focus on trilateral meetings at his level during those early years of Trump. And so when President Biden was elected, there was this sense of sort of trying to restart all of this again. Now, in fairness, I think some of that did get started at the end of Trump 1 as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really built back up, I think, under Biden. I do think we're going to have a different dynamic this time. I mean, we'll see. We don't truly know yet. But there's at least rumors that Trump, Ishiba, and Lee will meet together this week at the G7. We'll see. Marco Rubio has had a foreign ministers meeting. There would have been a defense ministers trilat at the Shangri-La dialogue had there been someone in the chair for the South Korean side. And I think, strengthening trilateral cooperation, if you think about it, is very much, I think, consistent with the Trump larger agenda here, which is about getting allies to step up and do more, and enabling those two allies to work more closely together so that the United States maybe can do less, is very much consistent, I think, with both Trump's view of the world as well as advancing the trilateral agenda. Now, the other thing to make here is that the other point to make here is that I think Japan and South Korea have a lot of reasons to talk and cooperate right now. I mean, we know that they're talking constantly about the trade negotiations they each have separately underway with the Trump team. I know the Japanese, for example, are deeply interested in the future of the U.S. military presence on the Korean Peninsula. So I would argue that actually that both the trilateral agenda will continue in some form, but also that there are new and pretty powerful reasons for Japan and the ROC to deepen their dialogue as well, given the uncertainties that they see. That would be my take, Mark.
Yeah, well put. Well put, Chris. I'm going to come to Yuki. Just one quick comment. I would also just underscore the Secretary, National Security Advisor Rubio point. Long history in this relationship as a parliamentarian. Really, I think with a lot of unheralded work on this issue as well. So a personal interest, which I don't want to overstate, but it always does help force issues at the top of agenda with senior policymakers, right? And that's not an unimportant factor. All right, Yuki, floor is yours on this issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the fact that Secretary Rubio, National Security Advisor, dual-hatted, has have a bona fide in this, as from his days as a senator, I think means huge for both bureaucracies in both Japan and Korea, right? As you say, signaling from a U.S. top-level leader is very, very important for those two countries. But then, as Chris highlighted, I think in a weird way, in a Biden era, it was a leadership from the top that tried to bring those two countries together that led to that, Camp David summit and all that. But in a very strange way, under this new Trump administration era, it's very bilateral approach in tariffs and all the other issues with its allies, as well as its tendency toward encouraging and urging allies to do more on its own, will provide its own incentives between Tokyo and Seoul to continue to engage and continue to talk, and basically, exchanging notes at times, and at times like current tariff negotiations. So I think there are, structurally speaking, there are definitely much greater forces that are going for stabilizing the relationship and actually moving the ball forward between Tokyo and Seoul. But as I said, I think Chris is, I very much agree with Chris that Japanese still has a deep skepticism about the progressive government, what kind of a leadership direction that comes out eventually. They're still in a kind of a wait and see mode. So I think it will be a huge positive if three leaders can indeed meet in Canada over the last 48 hours, over the next 48, 72 hours in Canada.
All right, outstanding, Yuki. You put a lot out there. I'd love to come back on all of it. We're running out of time. Let me just ask a very tactical question. Okay, if the three leaders don't meet, how is that going to be seen? Is that a step back, or is that just, things will continue on? And I think people will try for another summit down the line. How will that be viewed? Because it's hard. People, I think, often get built up around these summits, right? Understandably so. But if they don't happen, should we, what should we be bracing for if it doesn't happen?
So from my perspective, to me, this trilateral it's awesome if it happens, but if it doesn't, at this point in time, both U.S. Japan and U.S. Korea has its own plateful agenda to deal with. So I think it is more important for me that Ishiba and President Lee meets during this G7 times, that it's very important that Prime Minister of Japan and a President of Korea has an in-person FaceTime. Not so much in a trilateral because they have their own playful agenda with their US counterpart, but to me, that is more important. So it'll be more worrisome to me that those in-person meeting between Prime Minister Ishiba and President Lee does not happen in this case. Over to you, Chris.
All right, outstanding. Chris, let me come to you. Yuki, you could, Chris, opine on this, but we got 3 minutes left. I want to squeeze in China here. Chris, you know, both countries have, you know, a bit of a dilemma, right? They've got a growing China, more assertive China. That's been well done. At the same time, there are, as I mentioned earlier, fundamental questions around the alliance, right? Both alliances, role of U.S. troops, the economic relationship, all of that. How are these countries engaging China? Are they talking together about China? What's your take on that basket of issues?
Yeah, I would just, this is a topic in and of itself we could spend 45 minutes on, but I would just say,
I gave you 3. That's plenty, right? I mean,
right. Japanese certainly much more hawkish on the China question than any other U.S. partner in the Indo-Pacific. So if you're on a spectrum, the Japanese are closest to us and closer to us than the South Koreans are. All of that said, and I should also say that the perception of the threat from China is a key driver in everything the Japanese are doing in the national security space. All of that said, China remains a hugely important contributor to the Japanese economy, still a place where Japanese companies invest, still a major trading partner. There are differences between the US and Japan on this question of things like export controls vis-a-vis China. I think one of the strengths of the Biden administration was the focus on moving together on things like export controls. I think there's some risk that that's beginning to break down. So you could see widening fissures over the China question. I think much more of an issue when it comes to South Korea, where there are other concerns at play, including dealing with the North Korea problem. But the China factor in the trilateral relationship, I think, is going to get more complicated going forward.
All right, outstanding. Yuki, your comments on this set of issues.
Yeah, so I generally agree on that. Building on Chris's point about trade, I think when it comes to the economic and trade relations with China, Japan and Korea, I think, are closer together than where US is and US want either of those country to be. So it'll be interesting to see, because Japan, Korea, and China has their own trilateral forum going, focusing on more people-to-people trade and economic investment, things, youth exchange, things like that. So under this, Ishiba and E, how that trilateral will go forward or not, and then how that impact in return Tokyo and Seoul's respective bilateral relationship with the U.S., with everything that goes on in the trade economic space bilaterally.
All right, outstanding. All right, we are going to have to gavel down here on episode 115 of the CSIS Capital Cable. We didn't get the benefit of Victor's wisdom this time, but we will save that for a later date. Chris, thank you. Yuki, thank you. Outstanding insights. And to those interested in this, just a plug for the CSIS conference coming up on 18 June that will unpack this in more detail. We've got just an all-star lineup of former officials, U.S. senators. It's really going to be great. John Hamre as well. Anytime you have John Hamre, you can't go wrong. So there you go. All right. With that, thanks again. Big shout out to Chris, Yuki.
Thank you.
We will see everybody in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. That was great. Thank you. Enjoy it.
Thanks, Chris. Great to see everyone.
Bye.